And then we got some other cool things here. We got the scroll XY. So scroll X is if you got a scroller on your mouse and you click it, forward and backwards, it gives you a very discrete number of pixels, whatever your mouse is telling it it is. In fact, I have an adjustable mouse, so let's experiment. When I scroll, I get plus and minus 120, but let me just do a up click on what that is. A down click. Okay, so I can adjust the speed of my mouse, but that does not change the scroll value. But you can tell if it was scrolled forward, which is plus 120 for me, so it's a positive number, and then scrolled towards me, or reverse backwards, is negative. So these are the kind of things you need to check out and say, okay, maybe I want to flip that for some people or deal with that differently, but it's an input. So that was the Y. But there's also an X, which I thought was really cool. I'd totally forgotten this until I did the demo. But my mouse scroll wheel can also be pushed left and right. And when I do that, I get these inputs, plus and minus 120, which is just the other axis equivalent of me scrolling. And I can push my button down, and I get the middle mouse button. So it's kind of like I got all these choices. Now, personally, I don't ever use the middle mouse button to do controls for anything, because you can't rely on people having these other mouse buttons, which is a point I want to make. When we choose what game we're going to make, we have to choose a subset of the controls that we know everybody will have. Everybody will have a keyboard. Not everybody will have a command key. Everybody will have all the other keys. And not everybody will have a right and a middle mouse button. For Mac users that are still old school, they've only got the one mouse button. Now they can access the equivalent or an additional button by pushing the function key down, the special function key on their keyboard, and then clicking the mouse. But not all mouse users, not all OS X users know that. So you can only rely on the left mouse button. That's my opinion. If you're trying to develop a universal game for OS X and Windows, you can only rely on people having a left mouse button, which kind of narrows things way down as far as developing games or inputs. So, anyways, let's take a look at the code.
Well, we're going to address at any point in a future show, like being able to have more than one type of input, like where we say, in the example you just gave, like we'll be able to figure out if you have a 2-button mouse and then.
Are you talking about remapping or a discovery?
I guess so.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so that's really a discussion for controllers, although it applies in some sense to mice too. Something that's common in games is they do just what I said. They say, we can only rely on people having this subset of features based on where we're releasing the game and for what.
Least common denominator.
But then they can make a remapping feature where people can say, I've got a controller that's got more buttons. Like some people have really fancy keyboards. Or some people have really fancy mice that have extra buttons on them. And you can capture those inputs, like the buttons on the mouse, you can capture those extra buttons with a key event and provide a way for people to map those extra buttons onto some functionality in your game because they're a power player who's got the super mouse with the 20 buttons on it. And they can actually find them all in the heat of the battle. So yeah, we should definitely discuss remapping. But I'm not prepared for it today because it's kind of like a.
Oh yeah, it sounds like an advanced topic for sure.
Yeah, it's quite advanced in the sense that you have to approach it in a way where people don't get stuck or it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just seems like we would definitely approach that territory when we start talking about maybe whether you use keyboard and/or mouse, right? So if you could maybe create a game that could be played either way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, another thing people do is not key mapping, but they provide alternate configurations where you can go into a menu and say, I've got a 3-button mouse. I want to use a 3-button mouse configuration. Boom, and it lays out all the keyboard and mouse controls based on that. So yeah, we could definitely do that. All right, so we're running short on time, so I'm just going to direct people to the code and I give them an overview. All of the code in these examples is the same in its structure. They all come with a small file called folder called SSK, which has got just a limited set of features from my SSK library for things that I wanted to use. For particular, I wanted to use the table dump function that I have in the library so that I could print out all of the contents of the event without having to manually do it myself. So that's coming out of SSK. And then because table dump uses some other features, those are also required. So I've got a number of files from SSK, but they're not really relevant to this discussion. They're just for ease of coding the example. The important and really the only important file is main Lua. Config and build settings are merely, in this case, to set up the device size and the orientation. They have nothing whatsoever to do with the inputs. So if we look at the keyboard main.lua, the structure of this file and the structure of the mouse file also is at the top. I do a little housekeeping. I set the status bar to be off because I don't want that to be visible. And I change the buffering so that I make sure that I get all the console messages right away instead of having to wait for them. Now, that's not necessarily a problem on the desktop, but I just do it all the time by proxy or default. So it's done. You can just ignore it. The next bit is I load in SSK. Again, totally, you can ignore this. It's not part of the example so much as gives me a way of making my code simpler. And then I just did some, I localized get timer because I like to use that without calling system get timer. I'm a lazy typist. And I made two color codes. I made two variables, one called G, one called W. And in these are tables for the green color code and the white color code so that I don't have to type those over and over. And then you'll find a section called visual feedback. Now, visual feedback merely creates these circles and labels on the screen and places them in a place that is nice to look at. And I give the circles names like Control or Command, Alt, Shift, and those are the circle indicators. Let me close this again. So Control, that's this bubble here or circle. Command, Alt, Shift. And I create them up here. I put the reference to them in locals. And then I have some labels down here where I want to change the content, like the key name label or the key code label. And then I create the listener. And this is the part that people need to look at. I believe I've created full event listeners that will show you everything that's coming in. And you'll be able to see it simply by running the example and clicking and moving your mouse or whatever it is, which example you're running. So for example, the keyboard is clicking on the keys and doing whatever. You'll see everything. However, in the listener at the very bottom, I also dump out the event that gets passed in because different key devices, not just the keyboard. This example could be used to discover other key inputs. You would run it and then press the keys on your other device, and you could look at the console or the log, and you could see all these things that are coming in, and there may actually be more fields than what we're catching today. There could be additional fields that are specific to that kind of device, or yeah, that's it. If it comes in on the standard fields, you'll be able to see it on the simulated output. You'll see the output here. For example, if I were running this on Fire TV, Fire TV, and I was pushing the left and right controller, the little circle button, then you would see the phase names come in, and you'd see a key name, probably like left and right. I think there's a volume up, volume down button, maybe. I can't remember everything. Fast forward, reverse. Those would all come in here, and you'd see the key code and the name that is being used by that device for that input. So although this project is called Keyboard, you can use it for other things, for discoverability. So, but